Welcome to the show, Navid.
Hello, Jose. I'm really looking forward to our conversation, and I have been very much looking forward to it since you and I were connecting by email.
It's a very exciting one because we will touch on leadership, which is a very strong point nowadays and perhaps a point missing. So we need definitely better leaders and people to help those leaders.
For sure. And when you say leadership, Jose, what comes up for me is the topic of football, or soccer as it's called in the US, which no matter who you speak to, how old, whether they're old or young or middle age, everyone seems to have an opinion on the topic. So it's a very exciting topic, and at the same time, it's a topic that can be, very controversial at the same time.
Yeah, everyone is like a backstage coach.
That's right. Or as we like to say it in Germany, everyone on the couch believes to be a better coach than the one who is actually on the pitch doing the real work.
Oh, perfect. And so, Navid, I'd like to ask you something that's, tradition at this point with the podcast, which is, what is your origin story? So, how did you come about to intersect your path with coaching for C-suite executives, especially because you're in a certain niche, because you're in a niche of supporting through transition periods as well. So, what's your origin story behind that?
Yes, I love it. You want to go all in right
Yes.
away. So, yes, look, I mean, I had toyed with the idea of training up in the field of coaching for many years, and I was just very busy as an executive HR leader at the time, and I just thought to myself, okay, you know what? I will wait for the perfect year to arrive, where I have a little less stress and work to do, so that I can fully concentrate on this new topic for me, which is coaching. And funnily enough, Jose, what I did not intend to do is what I'm doing these days, which is full-time coach. And so my only aim at going through that coach education training was really to help me to become a more effective, more well-rounded leader. That was all I wanted to achieve. And of course, waiting for about 5 years, I realized that, at least for me, that perfect year will never arrive, which also meant that I thought to myself, you know what, I might as well just get going. And so, rather than waiting for the perfect year to arrive, I might just push ahead and get started. And it was a great choice in hindsight, because it took me on a journey across 3 continents over the course of 3 years. And when I finished the program, I not only learned how to be a professional and qualified coach, but it really added a new dimension to my leadership at the time, which I just did not possess.
I love that it all started with, I want to do this. There will surely be a time where I can do it, but eventually just said, let's go with this. I need to make now the time for it.
Exactly. I had to admit to myself that for me, maybe other people are more lucky than I am, just that the perfect timing never arrived. And so I thought as well, I might as well just get going now.
And so, from your perspective, because you were a leader already before going on this transformative journey, so from your perspective, what kind of help would you wanted to have had at the time before you went on your own?
I mean, I was lucky enough in that I had some prior experience of being coached. And that was really what triggered this whole idea in me that, wow, I mean, if I could be at half the skill level of the coaches that used to work with me as a client, I would be really more effective in whatever I do. And, I've spent 26 years in the corporate world. And just the last 20 years, I have spent working for some of the world's most admired companies, and only focusing on the HR function. And so despite the fact that you might think, that's how I thought of myself initially, I'm pretty good at coaching anyhow, because that's what you tend to do as an HR generalist. The reality is it was nowhere near sufficient to what I then learned and who I became on the back end of that 3-year training. And obviously, 12 years in now, it's a never-ending pursuit of learning to become more effective in what I do.
What surprised you the most in terms of gaps of your own skills? Because I imagine working in HR, you're already great with people because you need to have those soft skills really, polished, really learn how to read people as well. You already have the skills in terms of, let's say, art skills of knowing how to do your job. So what kind of gap did you feel the most when transitioning to coaching?
Yes, I think probably 2 or 3 things that came up for me as you speak about that. So the first one was, I always thought of myself to be a great listener, someone who can actively listen to what the other person is telling. And then I learned during my coach training that I was probably not as good as I thought I am. Quite the contrary, actually. So that was probably one of the most effective skills. And, I have been fortunate that I have interacted with incredible thought leaders at an early age. So I was a student when I met Jack Welch. I met Stephen Covey, the world-renowned author of The 7 Habits and The 8 Habits and several other books. And I really felt that, when I interacted with those individuals, I was obviously not the only one in the room. There were plenty of other people, but I really felt as if I'm the only person in the room with them, which I guess in a way comes back to their quality of listening and the quality of the presence that they brought to those, conversations. So I think that's the first thing I really learned about. And the pinnacle of that was I'd conducted my 3-year journey and I've become a professional coach, and I was coaching on the side next to my full-time HR role. And then I saw my coach training institute, which is called New Ventures West. They're based in San Francisco. They're offering a 3-day workshop for coaches on listening. And I thought to myself, you know what, I have to go. And I actually went on that training, and it really, again, lifted my listening skills from where it was to really a much better state. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, and I guess that's a skill you learn very quickly working in the HR domain, which is people come to you with all sorts of different challenges and issues, right? From my employees not performing, I need to manage them out, to, I want to do a big scale transformation program, I need HR support. And what I have to say is that, one key skill that makes you quite successful as an HR leader, and it really helped me to grow through the career ladder pretty quickly, is the fact that you are asked for advice and you happily share your advice, all the wisdom, all the good things, and coaching is quite different, when you work with a coaching client, if all you were to do is just offer advice, well, then you become an advisor. You're not really a coach. And so I really had to shift this modality of wanting to jump in and provide a solution to an issue that I can solve and I have solved in the past. And I could help my client right now to solve the issue the exact same way I solved it in the past, to really take a step back and really hold that all in, and then working with the client to help them to bring about that insight in themselves. And if for whatever reason they're unable to do that, ask for the permission, if they would be, willing to listen to how I have solved this issue in the past and see if that is something that resonates with them. So that's the second thing. And then the third thing I realized is that, and it goes back to offering advice and being proactive and, giving value. When I submitted, so part of our coach training included recording coaching sessions, and at the time, audio only, and submitting them to our coach training institute. And someone whose job title was a tape coach, they would actually just listen to that and then give you feedback based on the 8 core competencies of the International Coaching Federation. And generally speaking, I mean, they were very competent coaches that would just give you general advice as to what's working well, what do you need to improve on, and why. And when my tape coach feedback came back, I was quite surprised in that this gentleman, who was South African, had timed, at the time there was no ChatGPT or any of these tools around. He actually manually timed the time that I spoke and the time that I allowed my client to speak. And the ratio was 60-40. So 60% of the time I spoke, and 40% of the time my client actually was able to share their insights and opinions and struggles and challenges. And he said, look, I think you need to aim for an 80-20. And by the way, the 80 needs to go to your client. So again, it's one of those things that you have to take a very deliberate attempt in unlearning some of the things that you have been doing that arguably have been quite successful in terms of your career, but you have to kind of, bury them a little further in your memory and be with the client, present in the here and now.
It's really fascinating. And I definitely have a few follow-up questions to that. The first one I have is, so in this case, you had the direct feedback of your 60-40, you actually need to swap to 80-20 and 80 on the side of the client.
Mm-hmm.
So once you have that, let's say, acknowledgement, what helped you the most? Was it purely trying as many times as possible to reinforce that behavior to yourself?
Sure. I mean, what we did at the time, and we were quite transparent with our coachees at the time to say, look, imagine, I mean, Jose, if you were one of my clients, I would say, I am a coach in training. I'm not a qualified coach yet. And as part of my ongoing training and education, I would love to work with coachees. And obviously, I'm not charging for that service because I'm not quite competent yet. But, there's chances are that you will benefit from this in some form or shape. But most importantly, I will definitely benefit from it because I will probably make all the rookie mistakes you would expect a beginner coach to do. And so that's the first thing. And so I would really be open about that. And we had 3 coaches at the time. And of course, once you've had that very direct feedback, you are almost like, going extremely the other way. So instead of doing it the 80-20, you're doing like 95-05 or 90-10. But the reality is, it's not really just about the time allocation. What I realized at the time is that I paraphrase a lot, and that's probably not required. One of the things that tape recording feedback helped me to learn more about was the fact that when I did paraphrase, I didn't necessarily use my client's language. And so I put, sometimes my own spin to it. You would say something in your own language to me, and then I would try to paraphrase that with my own, what I took from what you just said. And by doing that, I would slightly tweak it into maybe something that wasn't entirely your intent. And so there are multiple facets to that. And obviously, I mean, I'm a mentor coach these days. I work with many other coaches myself and help them to up their game. But those are just on the technical foundation side, some of the things that I clearly had to work on to become more competent in what I do.
It's really interesting. And my brain is going through all the psychology behind it because, yeah, paraphrasing and mirroring are different skills and different behaviors. Because the sheer fact of you rephrasing is essentially adding computational overhead for the information to get through to the coachee. So
Correct.
little thought. And another thing I'd like to understand, and I think you've already partially touched base on, is we hear quite a lot about coaches nowadays and coaching as a profession. But on the other hand, we also hear about internal programs within companies about mentorship, for example. So let's say a senior professional in the company gets paired up with a junior colleague because they can show them the ropes, quote unquote, can maybe help progress a career in those early years, etc. But I'd like to hear your thoughts on the difference between being a mentor and being a coach to someone else.
Mm. Yes, I mean, there are very different modalities. And if I wanted to kind of complement that, I would also bring in the advisory piece, right? Which is you just share advice. You're like a consultant to your client and just give them ideas as to how they can solve their toughest challenges. So if I wanted to take a step back, and by the way, I believe, and this is part of my coach education training program, one of the very first slides I put up when I am training qualified coaches on my methodology to become certified transition coaches is a Venn diagram with those three modalities: coaching, mentoring, and advisory. And in the middle, the intersection of those three is what we call um, transition coaching or certified transition coaching. So we really leverage all the three modalities. It's not just the pure coaching or just the mentorship or just the advisory. At every point in time, you may be leveraging any one or all of these three modalities. So if I wanted to take a step back and think of the more puristic form of coaching, is to work with a client in a coaching capacity, meaning being present with them and asking them insightful questions so that they can figure out their own solutions. So that's what typically a coach does. If I wanted to compare that with mentorship, mentorship is much more directing, much more concrete, and much more tied to the experience of the mentor. Meaning, if you and I are peers and we have about the same level of professional work experience and life experience at the same time, we are unlikely to be great mentors to one another unless my upbringing and my way of making my career has been fundamentally different to you. And so, as you just said, someone, more experienced being paired up with someone who is more early in their career maturity. And so that's how it typically works. So the older mentor who has been there and done that shares concrete ideas around how the kind of less experienced younger individual can stretch up to have an established career. Now, the opposite is also true. I mean, I've worked in organizations where we have done what we call reverse mentorship. This was for BAT at the time in the year 2008 when I came to London for the first time. We set this program up and we had very young individuals paired up with our board members and exco members to teach them all about social media and how it actually works and what's the value of being present on social media and how that is different from traditional ways of marketing and all that. So it can actually also work the other way. But again, it all comes down to the experience of the individual that is transferable to someone else who would benefit from it. And then advisory is the most concrete of the three, I guess. Advisory is, if you think of McKinsey or Boston Consulting and all these other names that are floating out there, that is something very concrete. So let's say if you and your organization wanted to establish an internal coach faculty, right? And if you were to hire someone like myself, I would come in and advise you on what are the do's and don'ts of setting up a successful internal coaching faculty in an organization. How have I supported other companies to do the same? I would ask you a number of questions around your organization culture, its leadership, its beliefs and guiding principles. And then based on that, I would advise you as to, okay, based on what I've heard, I feel you are better off by going down this path, which means having full-time coaches dedicated to coaching, or no, actually, having part-time coaches that are having the day job, but on the side, they have some capacity to coach. And so that is the advisory, and that's how I would distinguish the three. But as I said, the kind of work that we do as transition coaches actually touches upon all three modalities.
Really interesting to hear the difference stated so clearly. In other words, it's almost like the coach is a guide. So it's not giving you the answers, but it's trying to make the answers present themselves to you by your own logical process.
Mhm.
The mentor the difference here is not necessarily the age, but the experience in a given domain. And then the advisory is sitting right there next to you, helping you achieve a concrete goal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Thank you, Navid. It was quite good to see to hear the difference stated so explicitly because sometimes these terminologies may get mixed up. So it's good sometimes to take a step back and have an expert like yourself state what each one actually is. So one thing I'd like to understand next, because a lot of your work is around transition periods. So let's also transition the conversation into that topic. And I'd like to hear from you about what do you see as being the most complicated issue to address during those transition periods for executives?
hmm So firstly, if I wanted to define what I mean with a transition, I think McKinsey has done a good job here, which I also cite in my book in terms of defining what is a transition, which they have defined as the period, which is anywhere between 12 to 18 months after the executive has assumed a new C-level responsibility. So that's the definition of what a transition is. What I'm excluding from this is life transitions. You get married for the first time, or you get divorced for the first time, or you move out of your parents' house, or you lose someone who is very close to you, or you give birth to a child for the first time. So these are life type transitions, and that's not the focus of my work. So what I call transition is the hardcore career transition into the C-suite. And so you said what can be a little complicated, what sometimes can get in the way. Well, firstly, 4 out of 10 executives that are promoted to the C-suite unfortunately do not make it. And that was a shocking statistic when I started to do the research for my book, because I assumed, again, in that time, there was no ChatGPT or any of the large language models available. I assumed it may be a typo. Maybe it's 4%, or maybe even it's 14% if it's really bad. But when I started to double click on that 40% number, I found 5 independent studies that all pointed to the same number and the same phenomenon. And the most widely cited piece of research is from Heidrick & Struggles, one of the largest search firms in the world. And they have looked back at a 10-year time period throughout which they placed 20,000 executive leaders in many thousands of organizations. And when they went back and did the analysis to see, okay, what happened to those appointments, they realized that 40% did not make it roughly 18 months into the appointment. And so that was the big intrigue, and that kind of led me down to the whole idea of, okay, let me just buy a couple of books and educate myself on this topic, because quite frankly, I had experienced that myself in my HR capacity. It just never, appeared to be such a big topic for me, at least. And to my surprise, Jose, there was no book written on the topic. And I just could not believe it. So I thought to myself, you know what? I might as well be the first one that really does the groundwork, does the research, and then publishes a book. And so I'm delighted today that, 4.5 years after publishing my book, there are 3 other books who have been published in the same field, although they all take just the lens of the CEO to transition successfully. So my book is titled Mastering Executive Transitions, the Definitive Guide. And it looks at what is uniquely different when you step up into the C-suite. And the other 3 books are written with, okay, I'm the new CEO. How can I now make the most out of my recent appointment? And what are the kind of things I need to look out for? So it's, fair to say that I, opened this discipline in a way, and really gave way to other thought leaders and authors to come forward and share their gifts with the world.
Really good. In a way, you created a transition period for this field as well. So you took that first step that no one else seemed to take first.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, now coming back to your question as to what gets in the way, which is the $1 million question, right? And funnily enough, I came to appreciate that this is a lot more expensive than the $1 million challenge. I mean, some statistics One of the sources I found was a consulting company that had crunched the numbers to look at how much does it cost on average if a S&P 1000 company CEO were to fail, which is the 1,000 largest companies in the US that are publicly listed. And that number is roughly $25 million. So if a CEO of, I don't know, Apple, who's, by the way, just transitioned or is about to transition as we speak, as we are recording this podcast, and it's a planned succession, there's no drama, not yet, getting in a way, where to fail. So let's say whoever, the name of the gentleman who succeeds Tim Cook, if he were to fail, that is going to cost Apple an average amount of $25 million. And I'm entirely sure, actually, for Apple, it will be a lot more expensive than that. But that's the kind of number you're looking at. And that gets us into the question of, okay, what are some of the reasons why that seems to be the case? I mean, I don't know about you, Jose, but what I can say is, as someone who's been involved in those appointments, working for those large organizations, there is a lot of energy, dedication, and attention that goes into those executive appointments. I mean, it's not like, oh, I'm the HR director of this division. I've just interviewed someone. I really like them. Okay, I'm going to make them CEO. No, there's multiple interviews involved, not just with myself, but with many other people. If it's a CEO appointment, typically the board of directors wants to get involved. If there is a process of some sort, it would really be a robust one, meaning there's background checking taking place, there's reference checking taking place, there's screening taking place, sometimes by a search firm. Oftentimes there's a psychometric being involved because they want to really make sure that the style and the cultural aspects of the leader is in line with the organization. Well, and again, nobody takes a university graduate and appoints them to become CEO. So you usually have relevant experience, generally speaking, as a leader. And all of that said, 4 out of 10 don't make it, which brings us to the big question as to how can that be? What gets in the way? And so to kind of sum it up for you and for your listeners, what typically gets you promoted to the C-suite is functional or technical skills. It's your expertise, it's your work experience that really gets you to be the incoming CXO. And what gets you fired pretty quickly on the back end of that big promotion for you is the lack of the so-called soft skills, meaning people, culture, politics, or a combination of these 3. So it's typically one of these things that gets in your way of success. If you were to add 2 or 3 other factors to that, the first one is, Marshall Goldsmith, who is a very famous coach and a mentor to me, someone who wrote a very kind foreword to my book. He wrote 42 books, probably by now the number is 45 or 46, but he had written 42 books at the time my book published, and only 1 out of those 42 books had outsold the other 41 books of his. And that book is titled What Got You Here Won't Get You There, which is a very fundamental truth and pointing out to the fact that, look, let's say, Jose, you and I and a bunch of other kids are playing football. Let's just stick with this analogy. And we are pretty darn good. And we are playing in the amateur league. Let's say we are in Portugal, we're in Lisbon, and we are the best amateur team that is there. And occasionally that gives us the kicker to be promoted into the Premier League. Now, if you and I and the other 10 individuals were to play exactly in the same way we played in the amateur league, that start of the Premier League season is going to be the end of the Premier League for us, because it's just a different set of skills and capabilities that are required at this new level of leadership. And it's the exact same principle in a corporate environment. You cannot, if you're an individual contributor, now you become a first-time manager, you cannot contribute with the same skill and mix of activities you were doing before. If you were a leader, a first-level leader, and now you become a leader of leaders, again, you need to spend a lot more time leading the next level of leaders than actually doing the work yourself. And so those are leadership shifts. And the higher you go up, the more table stakes they become. Um, and last but not least, I think I would also like to cite this study, which was conducted by Genesis Advisors and Egon Zehnder. They interviewed at the time 416 chief executive officers on the topic of onboarding and transition, and said, okay, hand on heart, if you were to rate your own onboarding, how effective was it? And 70%, so 7 out of 10 said, actually, I did not have a structured onboarding at all, or it was completely underwhelming, which again brings us back to the topic of, look, I have worked for organizations that had fantastic onboarding programs for the general population, right? Which works, let's say, for 99.5% of the total population. That's a perfect onboarding program. But if you step into the C-suite, you're part of the top 10, top 20, top 100 leaders in a company, a general onboarding, cookie cutter type onboarding process, it's just not going to cut it for you. And so that's the difficulty that some organizations seem to be faced with, which is they don't know where to start, they don't know how to do it, they don't know what are best practices. And for that reason, they just either offer the same to the C-suite or they don't offer them anything at all.
I see. So that's let's say step 0, so the recruitment itself. And let's assume it has gone well and fortunately have hired the right person into that respective role. So then the big bottleneck or the big missing piece then becomes that step 1, the onboarding itself.
Yeah, you could say that. Or it could be that, and this is ironic, right? I mean, I know organizations who want to support the incoming executive with coaching support, but then they bring a leadership development type coach into that position rather than an executive transition coach or a certified transition coach. Because imagine, Jose, you were a general practitioner, right? You were my doctor, and I would come to you with pretty much everything, right? I have a bruised skin, I have a irritation on my this, I've broken my little finger last time I played football, and you will be perfectly qualified to treat me on all those matters. But God forbid, if I had a serious heart issue, right? And we have just ran the blood sample results and the lab results are back and there's something completely off. And you know it's down to my heart. You yourself would tell me, look, I think it's about time you see someone, with a deep specialization in this field, right? I am not capable and I'm not qualified to help you with this. And the same approach applies to those organizations who bring in executive coaches or leadership development coaches and give them to the incoming executive and hoping that they're going to help them. Well, I'm sure they can help them on the general leadership development side of things, but this is a very different discipline and a different category. And for that, you ought to bring in expert coaches who do nothing else than this over and over and over. So that's the first thing. And to come back to your question around, step 1, step 2, I mean, some of the best practices that I would recommend organizations to start looking into is 3 things are generally speaking done pretty well. The first one is the admin stuff, right? I mean, you sign your contract, you send it off, everything will be set up for you. You have your devices all purchased and ready to be used on day 1. You have a working email, you have an employee badge that opens the doors of the building. You can open the door to the cafeteria, you can buy your things and what have you. Okay, that's all good. 9 out of 10 companies get that right. If you then look at this generic onboarding, business orientation type thing, again, 9 out of 10 companies get that right? So, and that's good for a general population. And then the last step that pretty much, 8.5 out of 10 get right is the legal and procedural formalities. To use a concrete example, when I joined Vodafone, which is a telecommunication company, back in the year 2014, because it's considered a critical industry, there are additional screenings required before you're being hired into the company. So they check your criminal track record and so on, and they want you to be a clean slate of paper when it comes to those things. Okay, check, 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 check. When we then start to look at, okay, what are value-adding activities for the C-suite, that points to four different things that are rarely done by organizations. So only 1 out of 2 get this right, which is, has the company really made sure that they have aligned the expectation of the incoming executive with the line manager and the direct reports? Only 1 out of 2 get that right. Means 52% get that right, 48% don't get this right. The second higher value activity item is having mapped the key stakeholders to every one of the C-suite positions out previously. And let's say if you were the incoming chief financial officer in company X, they know that for the incoming CFO, these are the critical set of stakeholders. And so you don't have to sit down on day one and break your head around who do I need to meet and what are critical stakeholders to my position and so on. Someone else has done the job for you. All you need to do now is to obviously show up, be curious, build your brand, and get the insights you want for the success of your mission. And that brings us to only 1 out of 3 companies get that right, so 33%. And that number drops to 29%, so which is less than 1 out of 3. When you look at facilitating cultural familiarization, meaning, especially at the CEO level, a lot of chief executives fail because when they come to a new organization, oftentimes hired from the outside, they assume certain things. They make big, bold statements in the first week or first month in the role, only to realize 3 or 4 months in that that was probably not a good statement to have made, or that direction of travel is actually not a good one to pursue. But now they're stuck because their word is on the line and have made those big, bold, ambitious statements. And now how are they going to backtrack out of those without reputational damage and issues down the line? So facilitating cultural familiarization means that someone in HR or someone in the business really takes time to sit them down and help them think about, how's leadership defined in our organization here? What are our cultural beliefs? What are our guiding principles? And which ones are the ones that we all agree with, but aren't even articulated yet? And so how can the leader then use this insight and knowledge to their advantage and not walk on all the landmines that are laid out for them as and when they join the new company, even at the top level? And then the fourth and last intervention, when I speak about higher value activities that is only conducted by 1 out of 4 organizations, is to equip the executive with a specialized coach. And so that, again, those are just 4 ideas how any organization that is currently listening to this podcast episode of yours can start to move in the right direction and bring me or any one of the other 72 CTCs that I have trained up by now to help them, figure this out and think through a process that really gets them from A to B pretty quickly.
This is really, really interesting. And as you were enumerating each of those steps and let's say types of onboarding activities, one thing that was going through my mind is that fundamentally, those activities look, their identity is similar to other roles in the company. So managers, junior colleagues, senior colleagues, fundamentally the identity of those onboarding activities are the same. The key changes there are twofold: the scale, because if it goes wrong for me, it's bad. But if it goes wrong for an incoming CEO, it's disastrous, to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
So that's first the scale, and then the quality as well. Because I can get an onboarding that's decent and have the colleagues that sit side by side with me day in day out, help me, guide me. But for the CEO and other C-suite executives, I imagine it's much more difficult to if they don't get that high quality onboarding up front, to then figure things out as they go along.
Mhm.
Do you feel like there's a way to actually reverse that? Like you're very high energy, very willing, very proactive. Do you feel like there's a way to correct those onboarding issues as the incoming executive?
Yes. And before I answer that question, I would like to come back to what you said initially, which is very important. You refer to it as scale, and I speak about the cost of derailment, right? Which is the same thing. So generally speaking, and I actually ran a project when I was working for Adidas early in my career, which was a great company to work for, really. I enjoyed working for them. Is, it's generally accepted that a regular employee turnover, if it's an involuntary turnover, meaning you've just been hired or promoted internally, it doesn't matter, and you are not really performing for whatever reason. And let's say 6 months after that promotion of yours, you are resigning or you're fired and leave the position and the company. Now, that phenomenon is, and there's a lot of data citing that, is generally accepted that that turnover, involuntary or employee attrition, as it's called, results in a 2.5 times cost of your employment. So let's say if you were earning 100,000 euros a year, just to use a simple example, and you only worked for 6 months and you left the company, the cost of the company is 2.5 times the amount, because the company spent some money to find you and hire you. They probably paid some recruiter or search firm to find someone like you. Then you were brought in. Some other colleagues took their time to onboard and induct you into the position. As you just said, someone sitting right next to you and helping you to get up to speed. And then clearly you did not perform well for the first 6 months. And that's the whole reason why you were asked out again. And that position is now vacant for another 1 or 2 or 3 or longer, right, month. And that means that everyone else now will be dragged into covering for the vacant position that is in the team. And the company, guess what, will have to, again, spend the money to find another recruiter and find some other candidate, buy them out from their existing contract, maybe offer them an incentive to come around. And so that whole thing roughly results in two and a half times your cost. Now, at the executive level, that differential or ripple effect is 10 to 30 times your salary. Because as you rightly said, if the chief executive were to underperform in the first 6 months in a row, well, guess what? That company can write off that full financial year immediately. And not only that, but they will probably suffer from, market share losses, potentially if they're a listed company, from market capital, write-offs. If the capitalization of the company suddenly drops by 5% or 10%, that can cost them billions. And so that's how you quickly get into the 10 to 30 times territory, because essentially it's the same thing. And I don't know how much you know about flying, but if you were to fly from, let's say, New York to London, and you were a pilot of the plane, and you would incorrectly assume an angle that is 1 degree different than the original angle you were supposed to take, you will land on a different country altogether. And so again, it's a small mistake maybe, but because your position is so important, is that the magnitude of your performance is like a scissor that widens up the further you go down. That is really going to be costing you and the company a lot of money. So that's just the first thing I wanted to note when you started to speak about scale initially.
It's almost terrifying to think of the magnitude of.
Yeah, absolutely. And so which angle would you like me now that I have spent time explaining the cost of failure, would you like me to take again to come back to?
I'd like to understand your thoughts on that. My onboarding was not great. I am suffering from lack of knowledge, lack of understanding of the culture. Some pieces went wrong. I'd like to hear your thoughts on. Okay, despite all that, I am very willing. I want to succeed in this position. I am proactive. What actions can I take to, course correct?
Sure, sure. We are now in the damage control territory.
Yes.
So, firstly, I gave to the world in the year 2021, when my book launched, a framework that is titled The Double Diamond Framework of Executive Transitions. It's a 7-phase framework with overlapping phases that really helps anyone to try to be more structured and more intentful, and as a result of those, reduce the risk of derailment and shorten the time to productivity by 50% or more. And what you refer to is typically referred to as the first 90 days, which is another very popular book called First 90 Days, written by Michael Watkins, and it's very outdated by now. It was written in the year 2003. And it's written for first-time managers or individual contributors, how they can really be owning their onboarding and be effective in the first 90 days. As we know by now, McKinsey, Harvard Business Review, DDI, they refer to this transition period as the first 12 to 18 months. So just focusing on the first 90 days is not only a mistake, but it's going to be nowhere near sufficient. If you think of my framework, the 7 phases, out of which only one looks at the first 90 days. So it's only 1/7 of the solution. And what happens quite often is that a lot of executives hit me up when they are in that exact same territory you mentioned. So they have maybe joined a month or two ago, it's not all going so well. The company is a bit hapless as to how they can support them. And somehow they start to Google or use the chatbot, and somehow they find me in my work. And so, of course, there are many concrete things that can be done, but what I wanted to bring to your attention and to anyone else's attention is that the very first phase of my double diamond framework with the 7 phases is the discover phase. And that phase is your day minus 90 to day 0, which again, it's beyond me, Jose, why any executive, if they were to follow the first 90 days methodology, must be sitting on their hands, looking out of the window, waiting patiently, then start to run like crazy on day 1, and then stop running after 90 days, which is the whole premise of this other framework. Now, the first phase of my framework is called Discover. And as I said, it's up to 3 months before you are starting. And the reason that is so important, by the way, that's another great book that I would recommend. It's called Before Onboarding. And the author of that book is Michael Burrows. And what I really liked about his suggestion and his idea is that there are many things that an incoming executive can start to do and demonstrate before they are appointed. Meaning, let's say you are the incoming CEO of the company called X, and you have just been announced that you're the incoming chief exec on the 1st of July. Today is the 25th of May. That gives us a 5-week time window to play with. You have been formally announced, meaning the existing CEO knows that you're the incoming, new chief executive. It's a planned succession, so there's no drama involved. And so he is really looking forward to pass on the baton to you, and actually has an inherent interest to make your onboarding a success, because all his legacy, he's been in the role for 10 years, is built on the company performance, and he really doesn't want to see that going down the drain in the same year that he's passing the baton on to you. And so now that you have been announced, you can do many things, such as you can reach out to your predecessor, who's the sitting CEO, and suggest that you want to have some virtual catch-up conversations with him to learn more about the position, learn more about the culture, learn more about the company, and from someone who's been in the role for long enough, get an idea or two around what are some of the key priorities, and maybe also get some ideas about the team that you will be inheriting. If it's deemed appropriate, and I'm entirely sure that the sitting CEO will say, sure, Jose, go ahead and do that, you may be getting permission to start to reach out to your leadership team members. Guess what? You'll be inheriting them in 5 weeks from now. They will be yours. And so it would be foolish not to do anything and wait for then what they want to walk into their office and say, hey, I'm the new boss. How are you doing? But really, by now, they have started to Google your name. They have checked you out on LinkedIn. They have used all the chatbots to learn all about you. But let's face it, it's very limited information they can find about someone. And so now it's your opportunity to not only start to introduce yourself to your individual leadership team members on a one-on-one basis, let's say virtual calls, or if you live in the same city, you can actually walk in and do that in person. But also, you can learn more about them, which is a great thing to know, because you don't have to wait until the first week or two to do that. Then what is also important is, look, every company I have worked for has at least one leadership team offsite, oftentimes externally supported by a coach or a trainer or facilitator, meaning the entire top team and the board of directors take 2 or 3 days out and they go to a different location. And the idea is that they work together in a workshop type way to think, let's say, 3 years out and start to translate it back into the annual plan for next year, year 2 and year 3. Assuming that that event is happening in the middle of June, where technically you're not enrolled and you're not in charge yet, you would be foolish not to raise your hand, and the company would be foolish not to hit you up and say, by the way, we appreciate the fact that you wouldn't have joined by then, but we would really like you to come around and not only be a silent observer to this happening, but we really would appreciate your feedback and input. And you know what? Because you will be the individual that will need to deliver the plan in year 1, 2, and year 3. And so you might as well have a say in it. And you see, there are so many things you can do in a very concrete way, although technically you're not in your first 90 days. And that's, I just explained to you one out of the 7 phases of the Double Diamond framework, and how you can really be structured and more impactful before you start. And of course, there are many other things you can do. To come back to your question, if the leader hits me up early or the company asks me to come and support the incoming leader, that's the perfect timing, because guess what? Because we can really get going early on and set the leader for a platform of success. Now, in your example, the leader is already enrolled for a month or 2 and is already struggling. That does not mean that this is a hopeless case and I won't be able to help them, right? So they are in the second phase, which is the immerse phase. And what's unique about the Double Diamond framework and its 7 phases is that I have researched every one of the 7 phases, and I describe in full detail what are typical activities that happen during phase 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And not only that, I've also researched what are typical challenges that the executives are faced with during each of the phases, and what are typical derailers, meaning what are some of the issues that may derail your entire ambition and career at each of those 7 phases at the same time. And then what I would do with the coachee, with a client, is I would use those as input and then work with them so that they can come up with, what challenges do I expect to come across in my position based on everything I know? What derailers do I expect to face as a result of what I know about the company and the stakeholders and so on so far? And more importantly, what are some of my mitigation strategies on the challenges and derailers that I want to put into practice to make sure that I don't fail and I don't become part of the 40% statistic?
Really fascinating stuff, Navid. And obviously the target persona for these conversations are the C-suite executives. But again, this feels very reassuring across any professionals that want to make a difference and want to succeed. Because again, it comes down to a conversation of scale. It's not because you're, just an engineer on the team that you don't need to put in the preparation before starting. You don't need to care because on day 1 you go through meetings, you go through onboarding. It's really good that fundamentally these are cross-cutting practices that we can put in place to become better professionals. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that if you do put in that work throughout your early years and mid years, fundamentally, when you do get to that leadership position, it will feel quite natural to you. You will be that much better prepared to, take up the position well, and then be prepared to face the reality, whether it's a good onboarding, whether it's a bad onboarding, and ideally, whether you have a transition coach there to support you.
Absolutely. And what, Jose, you and I have covered in the first 40, 30 minutes of our conversation is what I would title as executive transition intelligence, right? I mean, there is IQ. Everyone is familiar with what general IQ is. There is this other concept called EQ, which was coined by Daniel Goleman, emotional intelligence, and how you can be more effective with other people. Then there is the third category that was coined probably 15, 20 years ago called CQ, which stands for cultural intelligence. But the executive transition intelligence is really taking all these disciplines and more, utilizing the double diamond framework around, okay, how can I be more smart about my upcoming executive transition? How can I leverage some of what's established best practice and bearing in mind context, culture, people, all these various things, and utilizing a proven framework to guide me through that first 12 to 18 months. That is what I call executive transition intelligence. And you are the very first podcast host. I've done 110 podcast recordings by now. You're the very first one to learn about this terminology. This coming Wednesday, which is 2 days from now, I will speak about ETI for the very first time, ETQ, for the very first time on LinkedIn, and educate my followers around what I make of this and how it really fits with IQ, EQ, and CQ at the same time.
This is fantastic, Navid. And so I think this segues nicely. So how can people connect with you? Is it primarily through LinkedIn?
Yes. So LinkedIn is my only real social media platform. I actually handle my own account. I do not have a VA or a bot responding to people's queries. I'm generally speaking said to be very friendly and welcoming. So that is my kind of go-to place. I also have a weekly thought leadership newsletter, currently entirely free of charge, where I give my best short form thinking every week entirely away for free. If any one of your listeners wanted to sign up for the newsletter, as a welcome gift, they will receive a free sample of my international best-selling book. And yeah, those are probably two of the best places to get started with. And I will be happy to share the links with you so that you can include them on the show notes.
Yeah, by all means, the show notes will be the place to go to connect with you, Navid. Thank you very much. It was a pleasure, and thank you for all the work you're doing for good leadership in the world.
You're welcome, Jose. Thank you so much.